Welcome to Small Arms Solutions Crime Series. Today we're looking at what I would say the epitome of crime guns. Of anything that I've ever seen throughout my 10 years and throughout all my training and whatnot, the most common firearms that we ever came across were of the family of Jennings, Bryco, and Jiminez. These guns are the epitome of inexpensive, unreliable, unsafe, and just plain cheap firearms that we see out there. Now we have to talk about this as a family because we have the same firearms produced by three different companies. Now, if we look at the history of these crime guns that we're talking about, one of the common things we talk about is the Gun Control Act of 1968. And part of the Gun Control Act of 1968 was the ban on, quote, Saturday night specials. Basically, Saturday night specials were cheap firearms that were imported, such as guns by Rome and so forth, that were used commonly in crime. So, for the most part of the 1968 Gun Control Act was an importation ban. Many of you are aware of, for instance, Glock. We couldn't import Glock 380 handguns because there was a point system. You had to have a certain amount of points for a certain amount of features and have a cumulative number of points for it to be able to come into the country. And the Glock 380s were never part of that, so they had to make the ghost guns here. Well, after the 1968 Gun Control Act, in order to make inexpensive handguns, they couldn't be imported, so they had to be made here. So what we have now are guns that we refer to as the Ring of Fire. The Ring of Fire was referred to as firearms that were manufactured mostly in the California and Nevada area, Arizona area. They were, again, inexpensive, not very well made. They were geared towards, much more geared towards low-income families who could still have the ability to defend themselves, but the criminal element tended to like them a lot better and were to use them a lot more. And they became the favorite. They were guns that could be used, shot, discarded. They weren't expensive. We're talking guns that were mostly well under $100 or well under $150. And you could get them in 9mm, 380, 25, 22, 32 auto. You had a whole range of different types of calibers. The Ring of Fire is generally what we refer to as guns manufactured by Jennings, Bryco, Jiminez, Larson. You would have firearms made by Kel-Tec, just to name a few of what we're talking about. And they were all basically the American-made Saturday night specials. When we talk about this family of firearms, we are talking about all three companies because they're all the exact same firearms that went to different names because each company had gone through its basically being shut down, gone bankrupt because of lawsuits. So you have Jennings that was founded in 1978 by Bruce Jennings. Bruce Jennings was a son of George Jennings, who was the founder of Raven Firearms. And he produced a whole series of Jennings firearms in 9mm, 380, 32 auto, 25 auto, and 22 long rifle. And from there, you go to Bryco Firearms. Bryco Firearms basically bought Jennings Firearms after a fire, to be exact. There was a fire that came up and the company was destroyed. It was purchased by Bryco Firearms, and they manufactured, again, the exact same firearms. In fact, if you look at the slides, you would see on the right side, you could sometimes see Jennings so-and-so, Jennings so-and-so, but on the left-hand side, you would see Bryco. And the quality of the firearms was not increased by no means. It was just putting a different name. In 2004, Bryco Firearms was sold to an employee named Paul Jiminez. And then Paul Jiminez ran the company as Jiminez Firearms. And in 2006, he moved the company from California to Nevada. Now, all three companies went bankrupt due to the exact same thing. Lawsuits due to malfunctions, lawsuits due to accidental or unintentional discharges. They were all quality-controlled issues. Now, most of these guns, when they were sold, they were made... You're lucky to make a buck or two, per gun. They were made for quantity, not quality. So, unfortunately, for the manufacturers, they never really figured that out. That if they wanted to keep their doors open, they were going to have to make a quality firearm. In fact, our Association of Firearms and Tool Mark Examiners even came out with a safety warning on these firearms as well. For if they were dropped, they were known to go off. Also, if they were dropped due to the fact that they are striker fired and they used the firing pin for an ejector, if the slide was to come back hard enough, it would hit the cartridge would hit the firing pin and it would set it off, and the thing would fire out a battery. So there was a lot of really serious safety issues. So the pistols that we have here, we'd like to thank Brandon at the Gun Room in Shenandoah for getting us these various wonderful pistols for us to take a look at. Now, most of these are Jiminez. He was able to find most of the Jiminez. We do have a couple Jennings, and we do have one or two Brycos in here as well. But since basically all the models were the same, we're just going to go over some of the different models that were offered. The first two we're going to talk about is the Model 20, is the 22. In this case, it was a JA or Jiminez Arms 22. Now, This particular model of all three manufacturers was generally complete garbage. They were very, very rarely would they fire reliably. And it didn't seem to matter what type of ammunition that we put in them, but we would see them quite a bit. You would definitely get one shot off, to say the least. But it was a direct blowback. Did have a safety on the side. Magazine only held about 5 rounds. There's a couple different variations of these as well. You have more of the compliant ones where you would have live cartridge indicators. The earlier ones did not have that. But you have basic rudimentary sights. Now, all these are made out of a zinc alloy, and this zinc alloy was less than quality. It would not be uncommon at all to see slides crack, issues with barrels, as well as the parts on the inside that you'd have issues with as well. But the 22s were not known to be reliable whatsoever. And as you're going to see from some of the videos that we're going to show you, we did not get these to fire reliably for nothing. And we have one, this is the original Jennings. And this one here is the Jiminez. And you can see they're the exact same pistol. Just even Bryco and Jennings and Jiminez offer different finishes. You see the blued, you see the nickel, you see some different, you see wooden grips, you see the plastic grips. They all basically offer the exact same firearm. And we even tried both pistols, and neither one of these were we really able to get anything, any reliability whatsoever. And we tried a couple different kinds of ammunition too, even hotter ammunition, and we still were not able to get a reliable, feeding with these pistols. The next one we have here is the JA-25. Now, the 25 auto was probably a little less common than the J-22, but they did tend to be a little bit more reliable, due to the fact you had center fire and you had a round profile projectile, but still, I would not say that they were a reliable firearm. And this one here, we did get a few rounds off of. This was not reliable. Also, quite frankly, none of the guns that we had here were reliable. The only one here was the Bryco 48 that we were able to get several rounds out of without malfunctions. The Jennings Jiminez 9 that we have here, also we were able to get a few rounds out of, but none of these were, and they were just as I remembered them. We'd had these issues. Now we're going to look into the 380s. Now, this particular one is the Bryco 48 or 380 auto. This is the one that I think of when I think of these pistols because I saw more of these than probably anything else. These tended to be a little more reliable than any of the other ones. I really can't tell you why. It wasn't built any differently, but this particular model we saw more of. And most of these was very common for them to come in with serial numbers removed. The serial numbers were located right on there. They would grind them off or whatnot, and we would have to restore them. And due to the fact these were a zinc alloy, we were able to most of the time restore the serial numbers unless they did it in certain ways that we couldn't. Fortunately, most of the criminals out there did not know how to properly remove a serial number, that it couldn't be restored. But we had a very good record of being able to restore these. Now, the Bryco 48, it was a 380 that held 7 rounds of 380 automatic. Again, striker fired. You had your safety on here. And we're going to show you how these things come apart as well. We will show you this one here. They all come apart the exact same way. They are all striker fired, so you would have to dry fire. Then you would take a pin punch of any sort, push inward on the back plate, pull back, and lift up. And then everything would slide right off. Now, to talk about a few things on here for as far as criminal sticks is concerned. The firing pin striker that you had here, this was extremely common to have these break right off. Because not only was this a firing pin, it was also the ejector. So it had 2 functions. And the ejection part of it was a little bit more trying on it than as far as wearing is concerned, than the use of it being a firing pin. These would break off regularly. So what we would have is I had actually in my desk a box full of these. So whenever one would come in that was broken and we couldn't fire it, I just pull one out of my desk, drop it in, and get my test fires out of it. And then when we would enter it into the NIBIN or the drug fire system, we would just circle the breech face, circle the firing pin, and then tell the computer do not search based off the firing pin. It would put a note in there that it was a reference firing pin. So it would just search on the breech face. So that was one of the issues that we had with these firing pins. Now, as you can see, that the barrel is stationary, direct blowback, and you'll see we have some small parts in here. Now, these came apart very, very easily. We would often get guns in that wouldn't function because someone took these apart. The connector here came apart, and they didn't put it back together, so it wouldn't function. So that wasn't too uncommon either. But we also had reference guns, so we could fix all this to get a test fires also. In fact, for as far as the bullets were concerned, we didn't enter the bullets very often because it wasn't very reliable. It was very good for breech faces and firing pins, but it wasn't very good for bullets. However, if we had a pistol that came in that was not functional and we had reason to believe it was used in a crime, we were able to basically place a projectile in there, take a wooden dowel, and we'd be able to hammer the bullet through there, and it would catch all the lands and grooves on the rifle just as if it was fired. So we'd be able to get a comparison for a test from this gun to the evidence. So we were always able to do something. One of the biggest problems that we would have is if a gun was in a fire. If a gun was in a fire, the only thing that you could really do is take casts. You still were able to do, like we said, with the bullet in the barrel, but you have to take a cast of the breech face and compare the cast to the evidence. So, that's what would happen if you had a gun that went into that was in a fire. It couldn't be shot. Now, for as far as these guns as target guns, no. These were not designed to be target shot. These were designed as defense guns only. When you fire these things, the first thing you're going to notice is you're going to see a lot of felt recoil and a lot of sting to it because you have two pieces of metal that are smacking into each other. And you had harmonics in them. They were not a pleasant gun to shoot. And this copper zinc alloy is not strong material by no means. It wasn't meant to be fired thousands of times as a target gun. Again, you would have slides that would break. You would have frames that would break. These are just not guns that are designed for that, and they're not pleasant to shoot. For reassembly, we're going to install our recoil spring back in, and you have a bushing that goes over the barrel. Now you always have to make sure you put the firing pin in the right way. Drop it in like so. Insert your spring. So make sure everything gets lined up. Push in. Now we gotta make sure we push that back in. And there we go. But this particular model is the one that, when I look at it, brings back the most memories because we just saw so many of these. And of all the models that we had, this one tended to be the one that worked the most reliable. The next ones were the 380s. Now the 380s were Bryco 38, the Jiminez 380. Now these, even though they're the same caliber as the Bryco 48, these smaller ones did not have the reliability of that larger one. In fact, when we took these out to the range, it was just as I remembered. We had all kinds of stovepipes, failures to eject. We had all kinds of issues with them. But these were very common as well, just because of the fact you could fit these in someone's back pocket. They were very, very lightweight, but unfortunately they were not reliable. Generally, you could always guarantee you get one shot off, but that would really be about it. Same thing goes true for all these things. A lot of times they would come in with removed serial numbers. They had broken firing pins. They would also be passed around. We had found that a lot of guys in the Wisconsin Crime Laboratory, a lot of people who would go to jail, they talk obviously, how'd you get caught? Somebody would say, hey, we got caught because they were able to link the guns to the various crimes. So what ended up happening was we saw that guns were being passed from gang to gang to gang. So when we would be able to track the shootings with the guns, you would see them in totally different gang-related neighborhoods. So you knew they were being passed from person to person to person rather than staying with the same person. So, prisons are also colleges. These guys were able to figure out, hey, how'd you get caught? And then they alter how they do things when they got out. And we did notice in time as these digital databases began and when they began to link crimes together, that they would go ahead and change out their guns. The last one we're going to take a look at is the Jiminez JA9. Now, this is what they would consider a target pistol. Now, for as far as a target pistol, you can put target sights on it. You can put, an orange front sight blade on there, but this is not a target gun. It did have 10 rounds, and it was larger, but the reliability was not there. And this pistol, when you would fire it would sting your hand just from that slide smacking into that frame. It would sting you. And these were not designed as target guns. As much as you would try, that's not what they are. This one has gone through all the major changes that were done throughout the history of the firearm. You have a cocked indicator on the back where you would see a red plunger here that would stick out when it was cocked. On the top here, if this was loaded, you would have a live cartridge indicator that would stick up on the top. This would stick out. You'd be able to feel it or be able to see it. so you would know. However, this pistol also, at the last generation, did have a magazine safety, so it would not fire unless the magazine was in place. So, you know, we put some rounds through this one too, and very, very similar. We had a lot of malfunctions. Again, they were not designed as reliable target guns. Now, when we look at the concept, we want to manufacture cheap firearms so everybody could exercise their Second Amendment rights. This was hard, and I think the government, when they did the 1968 Gun Act, I think they struggled with this as well. The fact that you always want to make sure that everybody has that right, but at the same time, when you have a specific type of firearm that is used in outlandish numbers in crimes, what do you do? And the 1968 Gun Act did nothing other than move manufacturing here. The United States was always well known for making good quality firearms. And after the 68 Gun Control Act, somebody had to answer the call for the inexpensive firearms, which is what Jennings, Bryco, and Jiminez did, along with some other ones, Lorson and so forth. And I could say, working in a gun shop, a professional gun shop, as well as a sporting goods store, that we didn't sell a lot of these. We sold very few. In fact, one gun shop I had, he wouldn't even sell these. You know, we had firearms that were inexpensive, that were still of quality, that we would sell people, but we really didn't sell a lot of these. Now, if we go to Wisconsin, for instance, I worked in the Crown Lab in Milwaukee. We had a specific gun shop that was located in the outskirts of Milwaukee that ATF was able to trace most of these guns to. And this gentleman here, basically, he knew he was selling these to the gangs, but they were legal sales because the gangs would have somebody who they would keep is illegal, so they could go through the background checks, they could go through all the Brady checks and so forth, and they would buy the guns legally. Now, our gun shops in New York, if we had any indication or any thought that these were going to anything illegitimate, we would refuse the sales, and we did. In New York, it was a lot less of a problem at the gun shops because you had to have a pistol permit to be able to buy a pistol. So unless you already went through that background check, you weren't. So we exercised that more on long guns. In Wisconsin, however, you didn't have a pistol permit, so anybody could buy anything. And again, this gentleman knew, and when ATF went after him, they couldn't do anything because the guys checked out who got him. Even though he knew who the end users were, it was still perfectly legal. And you know, he was watched. He's probably still in business today. So, you know, it's a slippery slope trying to take the criminal element from the legitimate element. There are a lot of firearms that are out there now today, which are inexpensive, but they are quality. They are something that you can trust. There are ones that are reliable. You will get that second shot off, even if it's just ball and ammunition. You know, coming in the crime lab, this stuff was only seen with ball and ammunition. I can't really think of any time I ever saw one of these come in with hollow points. Everybody who would use these types of firearms, it would literally be the cheapest ammunition they could get their hands on, and it was ball. In actual shootings, about the only time we really ever saw hollow points that were used were if it was a law enforcement handgun, law enforcement projectiles, or if it was an armed citizen who defended himself, who was proficient in firearms. That was about the only time that we saw hollow points. These scumbags really didn't know what they were doing. They just found ammunition. Sometimes they were even lucky to put the right caliber in there. We had found 380s and 9mm magazines and so forth, and 40 calibers that had 357 SIGs in them. We had all kinds of stuff. In fact, 357 SIG was interesting because whenever we would get one of those in, we would run a 357 SIG and 40 in both databases, both 40 caliber and 357 SIG, because they could be chambered in both. Even though you'd only get one shot off, firing a 357 SIG and a 40, you still were able to get the breech faces off it in case somebody fired them in the wrong one. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to a range and we're going to take a look at several different firearms. And you're going to be able to see the way they malfunctioned. We gave you some details on that. We're going to fire basically all of these firearms and give you just a really good example of the quality of these firearms. Well, there you have it. You have range footage showing you the lack of reliability and durability of these firearms. So now here's the other question. How do you feel about somebody manufacturing a firearm that's designed for self-defense for low-income families that don't work? So literally you're making firearms that you know that don't work for these people legitimately. So there's a part of your conscience to look at to begin with. For as far as the crime use, we're happy they didn't work. God knows how many people have been saved from being hurt or shot or injured due to the fact that they didn't work. But that's where my question would come in of low-quality firearms. If you're making something that doesn't work, that is not reliable, how you're claiming that you're making that for the low income when you're giving them something that they're not going to be able to use. So for as far as the crime series guns, this really hits the top of the list. This was really the most common firearm that we had seen. In both crime laboratories, probably nationwide. I would imagine if you talk to any crime laboratory in this entire country, they would say these are more common. Now, these days, they're probably not as common because they've been out of production for quite a few years. So, you're not seeing as many. A lot of them have been taken out of circulation. I've gotten emails from people who tell me about how they have ones that don't work and where they can get parts and so forth, and I have no idea. These guns are no longer in production. What are you going to do? Not that it's much of a loss. Today we see coming from reputable manufacturers, Ruger, Remington, and so forth, Smith & Wesson, guns in the $200 range that are reliable and they are good guns for self-defense at any price range. For as far as our forensics were concerned, you had everything. You had removed serial numbers. You had guns that were broken. We had to repair so we could get test fires out of them. You had ones where you had guns that were dropped and they would go off. You had all kinds of different issues. Less than a successful firearm, however, there were millions of them made throughout those years. And all those owners of Jennings and Bryco and Jiminez said they were interested in putting out cheap firearms. They were interested in the quantity, not quality. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, please click like, please subscribe, and even better, share. Thank you.